After my double bypass, my doctors had one primary focus when it came to my blood work, and that was my LDL cholesterol. Get it down, keep it down. Here's a statin. Um, that was my conversation. LDL was the villain, statins were the solution, and I followed, their advice because I had just had double bypass, and I trusted the people that had saved my life. And then my results came back for my liver enzymes, and they were through the roof. That's when I started asking questions, not so much about statins, but about cholesterol itself, what it actually is, what it actually does, and whether the singular focus on LDL that has been given, it's being given so much, was really the complete picture of my cardiovascular risk. What I found out changed everything about how I felt about this topic. And I think it's going to change how you think about it too. Because the truth about cholesterol is something that most doctors either don't have time to explain or were never fully trained themselves. And for those of us managing our heart health, this is information that's genuinely needed. Now, a quick disclaimer, I'm not a doctor. This is my personal research and my personal experience. Talk to your healthcare provider about your specific numbers and your situation. But don't walk out of that office without understanding what I'm about to share with you. Now, hit that like button and let's get going. Let me start with what most of us have been told, because I think it's important to understand the standard narrative before we start pulling it apart. Cholesterol is bad. High cholesterol causes heart disease. LDL is bad cholesterol and needs to be as low as possible. HDL is the good cholesterol. Total cholesterol should be under 200. And by the way, that number used to be 300. So think about that for a minute. And if your LDL is too high, the solution is a statin, a medication that blocks your liver's ability to produce cholesterol and brings your LDL numbers down. That's the narrative most of us grew up with. It's what gets reinforced in almost every doctor's appointment and what the American Heart Association has been, pushing for decades. And it sounds logical on the surface. If cholesterol builds up in the arteries and causes blockages, then less cholesterol means less risk, right? Well, except that's not quite how it works. And the more I dug into research, the more I realized that the cholesterol story we've been told is a massive oversimplification, as what had led to millions of people, including myself, to focus on the wrong numbers, while the real drivers of cardiovascular risk, they went unaddressed, quite frankly. So take a minute here. So subscribe to this channel right now. If you haven't already, drop a comment below and tell me, what kind of conversations you've had with your doctor about cholesterol. What numbers are they focused on? I want to hear from people in the community about their own experience, and share this video because this is one of the most important conversations that we can be having about heart health. And almost nobody is honestly having this kind of conversation. So let's keep going. Before we talk about what's wrong with the standard cholesterol narrative, I want to make sure everybody watching understands something fundamental, something that I think is completely lost in the LDL obsession, is quite frankly what it is. Cholesterol is not a poison, it's not a waste product, it's not something your body produces by accident. Cholesterol is one of the most essential substances in the human body. And without it, you can't survive. Every single cell in your body has a membrane, the wall that surrounds and protects the cell. Cholesterol is a critical structural component of every one of those membranes. It gives them flexibility and integrity. Without adequate cholesterol, your cell members, they don't function properly. Your brain is approximately 25% cholesterol by dry weight. Cholesterol is essential for the formation and function of synapses. That's the connections between neurons that allows your brain to think, remember, and function. There is a reason that cognitive decline and memory issues have been, reported with side effects for statins when they are used. Statins lower cholesterol throughout the body, including the brain, where cholesterol is critically needed. Cholesterol is the raw material your body uses to produce steroid hormones: testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, DHEA. Every single one of these hormones is made from cholesterol. When you aggressively lower cholesterol, you are potentially impairing your body's ability to produce the hormones it needs to function, including the hormones that affect heart function, muscle mass, energy, mood, and sexual health. For those of us over 55 whose hormone levels are, already declining naturally, that's not a minor concern. Cholesterol is also essential for the production of vitamin D, which your skin synthesizes from cholesterol when exposed to the sunlight. And it's required for the production of bile acids that allow you to digest and absorb fat-soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K. Your body produces cholesterol precisely because it needs it. Your liver makes cholesterol every single day, and when you take a drug that blocks your liver's ability to produce cholesterol, you're interfering with one of the body's most fundamental biological processes. That's not a decision to make lightly, and it's certainly not a decision that should be made based on a single LDL number without looking at the complete picture, which is so important and which we'll get into here in a little bit. So what's wrong with focusing only on LDL? Let me explain why that single number tells you much less than you've been led to believe. LDL stands for low density lipoprotein. It's often called bad cholesterol, but technically LDL is not cholesterol. It's a carrier protein that transports cholesterol throughout the bloodstream, and the standard LDL test that most doctors order measures the total amount of LDL in your blood, not the quantity, not the quality, not the type, just the number. Here's why that's a problem. Not all LDL is the same. LDL particles come in different sizes. Large fluffy LDL particles are relatively benign. They don't easily penetrate arterial walls and are less likely to contribute to blood, to plaque formation. Small dense LDL particles they're a different story. They're small enough to penetrate arterial walls. They're more prone to oxidation, and they're far more strongly associated with cardiovascular risk than the large fluffy LDL. Your standard LDL test does not tell you what type of LDL you have. You could have a high LDL number made up primarily of large fluffy particles, relatively low risk. Or you could have lower LDL numbers, made up primarily of small, dense particles, significantly higher risk. The number alone doesn't tell you which situation that you're in. And then there's the question of oxidized LDL. LDL cholesterol that has been damaged by oxidative stress. Oxidized LDL, it's far more dangerous than regular LDL. Oxidized LDL is what actually gets deposited in arterial walls and drives the formation of plaque. And what causes LDL to what causes it to oxidize? Seed oils, refined carbohydrates, sugar, chronic inflammation. The same dietary factors that we've talked about, throughout this whole series. Lower your LDL number with a statin. Lowering it with a statin, just does nothing to address oxidized LDL. If you're still eating the foods that caused oxidation, You can have beautiful low LDL number and still be, forming plaque if your diet is driving oxidative stress. That's a sobering thought. And it's one of the things that most research, turned up that I did, it genuinely shocked me. And did you know that, 50% of people who go into the hospital with a heart attack, 50% of them have LDL cholesterol or total cholesterol that is below 150. So now, quick break. If this is shifting how you think about your cholesterol numbers, that's good. That's exactly the point. Subscribe, so you get every video in this series. Share this with someone, who's been put on a statin or been told their cholesterol is too high. This information could change the conversation that they have with their doctor. And leave a comment below. What has been your experience with cholesterol and statins? I want to hear from you. So let's keep it going. So if your LDL alone isn't the marker we should be focusing on, what actually does matter? Let me walk you through the numbers I now pay attention to and why I think they point to a far more complete and accurate picture of cardiovascular risk. The first one is triglyceride to HDL ratio. This is one of the most powerful and most underrated predictors of cardiovascular risk and insulin resistance available to us. And it's calculated from numbers that are already on your standard lipid panel. You don't need extra tests. Now here's how it works. Take your triglyceride number and divide it by your HDL number. The result is your ratio, and here's how to read what you get. So once you find it out, a ratio between 0.5 and 1.9 is optimal. That's where you want to be. A ratio between 2.0 and 3.0 suggests some degree of insulin resistance is developing. And a ratio above 3.0 is significant warning sign that that level is associated with meaningful insulin resistance and elevated cardiovascular risk. Now, let me tell you where I personally land on this. My triglyceride to HDL ratio is 0.4. That's not a typo. 0.4, which is actually below the optimal range on the low end, meaning my triglycerides are extremely low relative to my HDL. And I want to be clear about how I got there, not with medication, not with a statin, with diet. Going, low carb, then keto, then largely carnivore, dramatically dropped my triglycerides and raised my HDL at the same time. That combination is exactly what a clean, low-carb diet does to your lipid profile, when you give it time to work. That's very important. You got to give it time. I share that, I share this number not to brag, but to show you what's possible when you address the root cause, the carbohydrate and refined foods that drive insulin resistance, instead of just, treating the symptom with a drug. Now, my LDL number is what my doctors were fixated on. My triglyceride to HDL ratio, however, is what actually tells a story of my metabolic health. And at 0.4, that story is a good one. Why does this ratio matter so much? Because it's a strong proxy for insulin resistance, the metabolic condition and where your cells stop responding properly to insulin and your blood sugar stays chronically elevated. Insulin resistance is one of the most powerful drivers of cardiovascular disease. It promotes inflammation, damages arterial walls, drives the formation of small, dense LDL particles, and raises triglycerides while lowering your HDL. The triglyceride to HDL ratio captures all of that in a single simple calculation. Pull out your last blood work right now. If you have it nearby, divide your triglycerides by your HDL. That number tells you more about your cardiovascular and metabolic health than your LDL numbers ever will. The second marker is fasting insulin. Most standard blood panels don't include this, but you can request it. Fasting insulin tells you how hard your pancreas is working to manage your blood sugar even when you haven't eaten. High fasting insulin is an early warning sign of insulin resistance, often showing up years before blood sugar becomes a problem. For cardiovascular health, catching and addressing insulin resistance early is critical. The third marker is C-reactive protein, specifically high sensitivity CRP or HSCRP. This is a marker of systemic inflammation. And inflammation, chronic low-grade inflammation throughout the body, is now understood to be one of the primary drivers of cardiovascular disease. Inflamed arterial walls are where plaque forms. Inflamed blood vessels are where clots are more likely to develop. If this HSCRP is elevated, your cardiovascular risk is elevated regardless of what your LDL says. The fourth thing that I now want to pay attention to is the LDL particle size, specifically where I can get an NMR let's see if I have trouble pronouncing this, lipoprophilic test, or similar advanced lipid testing that breaks down LDL into large and small particle counts. If you can access this test, it gives you a dramatically more accurate picture of your actual cardiovascular risk than a standard LDL profile will ever do. When you look at these four markers together, you get a real picture of what's happening in your cardiovascular system. Not just a cholesterol number that may or may not mean, what you've been told. So what do I now believe about cholesterol after everything I've researched and everything I've been through? Let me be direct with you. I believe cholesterol has been wrongly demonized, and the singular focus of lowering LDL has distracted us from the real drivers of heart disease: insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, and the dietary factors that drive all of these. I believe that cholesterol is essential for human health, and that aggressively lowering it with medication carries real risk to your liver, to your brain, to your hormone production, to your muscle function, that are not always adequately communicated to the patient. I believe that the statin my doctors put me on after my bypass damaged my liver based on my enzyme levels that showed. And that conversation about whether I actually needed the medication, given my completely metabolic picture, was never fully had. Just never had that conversation. And I believe that most people, walking around worried about their cholesterol number would be better served to understand their triglyceride to HDL ratio, their fasting insulin, and their inflammation markers, and addressing those, through diet and lifestyle. Then by taking a medication that lowers one number while potentially creating problems elsewhere. I'm not telling you to stop your statin, talk without talking to your doctor. I'm not telling you statins are never appropriate for anyone. What I'm telling you is that you deserve a complete picture. You deserve to understand what your numbers actually mean, and you deserve a conversation with your doctor that goes beyond LDL. So here's what I encourage you to do in your next appointment. Ask for these specific things. Ask for your triglyceride HDL ratio. It's already on your standard panel. Just do the calculation yourself to ask them to explain it. As for fasting insulin, ask for a fasting insulin test to be added to your blood work. Ask for high sensitivity CRP test to check your inflammation levels. And if you want the most complete picture of LDL, ask about advanced lipid testing that measures particle size and number. These are not exotic requests. These are legitimate clinical markers that give you and your doctor far more useful information than total cholesterol and LDL alone. A good doctor will they'll welcome these questions. And if yours doesn't, that might tell you something too. If this video has helped you see cholesterol numbers differently, please share it. This is exactly the kind of conversation that needs to be happening more widely all over the world, really. Subscribe to this channel for more honest information on heart health, nutrition, and healthy aging. And leave a comment below. What are your cholesterol numbers? Has your doctor ever talked to you about triglyceride to HDL ratio or inflammation markers? I want to hear from you. The next video in this series will be coming soon, so make sure you subscribe and you don't miss it. I'll see you on the next one.